The Flash is one of those shows that's had an incredible run and has left a legacy behind, being one of the longest lasting DCTV shows of all time, just second to Smallville. At one point this show was peak superhero TV and was a lot of people's favorite show at some point. However, there is no denying that the more seasons this show got, yes, there have still been some very high highs. I could name a bunch from the later seasons, but not as much compared to the low lows. So much so that this show, once everyone's favorite, suffered a downfall throughout the years and a big decrease in quality. And in this video we'll be going over exactly why this is the case. We'll be going over the real reason why this downfall of The Flash happened. So starting off, we will be going over the main character itself, The Flash. Now there's absolutely no denying that Barry Allen, or just Grant Gustin in general, playing Barry Allen aka The Flash is by far the best part of the show. His writing is always very good, he always has something good to do, and Grant was always very good. He always brought up his A game regardless of which season it was. Now in the earlier seasons of The Flash, the character itself, he was, inexperienced, he just got his speed, he was just getting, that speed slowly. In season 1, of course, he's the slowest he's ever been. It makes sense that he gets help in season 1 because he doesn't really know what he's doing yet. And you could count the same for season 2 as well. He's inexperienced still, no problem with that. He's not the Flash that he is destined to become yet. He's still years away for that to happen. But then throughout the show he gets faster, and the more he gets faster, the more he gets nerfed. He gets tossed around by villains he's more powerful than, and yes, I understand this is for, plot armor to make the episodes, last 40 minutes. Otherwise, it would be an unfair game. The Flash will just completely destroy his villains regardless. But other than that, the other problem with this is even though, okay, he's been nerfed, what makes this even worse is that he still needs help. He's the fastest man alive and he still needs help from other characters, and to me that just never made sense. Now I will give credit where it's due. Season 8 is where this stopped. After 5 seasons or something like that, The Flash was finally his own independent superhero. He knew what he was doing, he barely needed help, and he was more confident with himself. Yes, in season 8 he's much faster than he ever was in season 1 or the earlier seasons in general. But I was really happy that they did this in The Flash season 8 because, this has been going on for so many seasons now and it's been getting annoying, and season 8 was where this stopped and Barry became more confident in himself and needed less help. So I did really like this. Now writing wise, Barry was the main focus for at least the first 4 seasons, as well as you can say the start of season 6 and season 8. Other than that, he's been completely sidelined by side characters from his show, and this is one of the reasons that's caused a downfall in the show. It is that you sideline the main character. And getting into more detail on that, we'll go over the storylines for The Flash. So there's no denying that The Flash began with such an engaging story of Barry Allen gaining super speed and becoming a hero. He's becoming the Scarlet Speedster, learning more about his abilities, and we meet Team Flash and all of that. All of that was very good. However, as the seasons progressed, the storylines became repetitive for the most part. I will go over that in more detail obviously, but this even goes for villain wise. Now the first 3 seasons you can say had the best villains of the show. I wouldn't argue against that, but I would disagree in my opinion. But still, you can argue that the first 3 seasons of The Flash had the best villains, and all 3 of them had something in common, which were that they were speedster villains and they were much faster than our main character. This was something that was repetitive for the first 3 seasons. And having 3 speedster villains, it makes sense of course because the show is about The Flash after all. But then this led to fans being like, okay, we've had 3 speedster villains, they've been very good, let's have something else for season 4. Now although repetitive, as I said, fans argue that the first 3 seasons had the best villains throughout the whole show. And the reason why is how they worked with these villains. What really worked with these villains is, and you can add parts of later seasons as well, for example season 4, season 5 and season 8 as well, were elements of mystery. And this was definitely what the show did best in the earlier seasons, especially with the villain reveals. Like, you don't get those Savitar zoom reveals anymore in the later seasons. Those were just absolutely crazy. The later seasons definitely lacked a lot of mystery, and is why it kept the audience less hooked, especially with the villains. For example, taking season 5 as one of the worst seasons of the show, the most memorable part of that season was the Nora Reverse Flash prison reveal, and how they tied that in with the dagger eventually. That was good mystery, and that was something that they've done really well. In this season, that was not good at all, but it was still the one that, shined the most throughout the whole season 5. Now, say for example we had a season like season 7, which I consider the worst season of the show. It had no mystery and was filled with complete disappointment, which right now I could even argue season 9 is down there too. But the point I am trying to make over here is that the strong points of the show was when the storylines had mystery as the core element to keep the fans hooked. You want to know who these villains are, who's gonna be behind that mask. All of that just kept everyone intrigued. The fact that we didn't really get that later on in the seasons, or just finding out why this villain hates the Flash so much, what's this personal connection got to do with them, all of that just kept the fans hooked, in my opinion, and this is why these villains worked. Now, a lot of plot points also started to, slowly get repetitive, as I said, which left the fans disappointed. Other than, talking about, the first 3 seasons being speedster villains and how that's repetitive. For example, 9 seasons in, you want something new. You want to see something new. Now, of course, I will go more in detail with this later on, but every season, apart from season 8, we had Barry being incapable of defeating a villain all on his own, despite him being way more powerful and faster than them. This is something I've mentioned before as well. And, he can't do anything without some sort of pep talk to make the other characters also shine. And this was really annoying. Everyone wanted to see Barry become this, his own confident, his own, powerful superhero. And I think worst of all, Barry lost his speed pretty much every season in some way, and that is definitely the most repetitive thing the show has done as well. Now, going back to the villains, the earlier seasons, as I said, had compelling and you could argue the best villains of the show. Reverse Flash had a personal connection to Barry. There was a lot of tension and character growth over there. Zoom was just terrifying, clear motivations. And it was a dark season. It was very intense, both of which very good storytelling, character development, and they had that mystery as the core element, as I said. Now, of course, you can add Savitar into the mix as well. I would even argue Clifford DeVoe was there, and they all had clear motivations and very good character writing, and it matched a good rivalry with our protagonist, the Flash, because it had these higher stakes. Villains later on in the show, however, lacked this, whether it be Cicada, Mirror Master, The Forces, Godspeed, Red Death, Cobalt Blue. They all lacked this. Their storytelling was no way near as good. Their writing was just horrible, given a lot of cringe dialogue, which made it even worse, and did not really have a personal rivalry towards the Flash alone. It was more so either Team Flash or it had to do with another character on Team Flash, for example with Cobalt Blue. It wasn't as good of a rivalry and was definitely a lot weaker in terms of quality as well. Most importantly, lacked the mystery, WTF reveal if you want to say, and it just did not have the effect that made the previous villains far more memorable. Now, yes, there was a break in this pattern in season 8 where all 3 villains were genuinely really good, did have a slight darker tone compared to season 7, and did have a good rivalry with the Flash and were just much better written. Despero definitely did shine with that. Now, I'm going to mention this now, but I'm going to go more in detail with this later on. But again, the reason why season 8 really shined, not only did it have good villains, but also it had to do with the structure of the season. As I said, I will get into that later on, because right now we're talking about the villains. But season 8 also did have that core mystery that made the season interesting. For instance, Armageddon and the whole Reverse Flashpoint timeline reveal. And then we had the Deathstorm reveal, and then later on with all the negative forces and Reverse Flash being like the main big bad. The later seasons did lack this. Now when I say later seasons, I just consider season 4 onwards. But the later seasons, as I said, it's been very hit or miss. And the part that definitely did not stick the landing was the villains that came after the first 4 seasons. Sure, as I said, you can count out some villains that came later on, but most of them just were not the same as they were earlier on. Now, there's no denying that another reason why the show kind of fell off was to do with a decline in, quality character development. In the earlier seasons, we've had characters like Cisco, Caitlyn, all the different Welleses, and even Joe. You can even say Iris and Barry, of course. They were all given depth and growth. Now, Iris really struggled to get into her reporting thing. She was more so just popping up into Star Labs and just helping out with Team Flash. Now, in the earlier seasons, as I said, Iris did have a lot of journalist stuff to do, but then they kind of just threw that away for a while until season 6. I will say that did really make her struggle in terms of her character. We did obviously give Cisco powers, and we eventually ended up making Caitlyn Killer Frost as well. These characters though, they were all OG Team Flash. We stuck with them since the beginning and are definitely by far the more developed characters. They gave us a reason to care about these characters, and were just so much better written. When we got to see all of them with their powers and how they were trying to figure out how they're going to use them, eventually becoming their own superheroes. It was very, very good, and it was very interesting as well. Same for Iris's journalism stuff. When she began to, dive into that journalist stuff, she became a far more interesting character. Best of all, Team Flash was not cramped. It was small and condensed and not as crammed up as it is in later seasons. And you can say most of the characters had something to do. Caitlyn was of course the medic when Barry got injured, and she was Killer Frost out there in the field. Cisco was the tech person and comedic relief, and he was out there when necessary as Vibe as well. Iris with her journalism stuff, and Joe of course with the whole CCPD thing when Barry was of course doing his CSI stuff. The quality of the writings of course with these characters did fall off in some way eventually, but all of this was just very, very good, and as I said, it just was not crammed up and it just fit well. Eventually, of course, they did set up Cisco leaving and they introduced Chester. Caitlyn had this weird Frost arc where they become 2 separate entities, and I just really did not like that. And then we ended up having Keon, not only making Team Flash more crammed up, but then it of course you have to add more into these characters because they just become separate characters after, and I think that did really affect the show. Not that character development is of course a bad thing. What makes it a bad thing is the way they're written. But the problem with later seasons was that the B plot was not the B plot, whilst the Flash that was meant to be the A plot was not the A plot. In fact, it was the complete opposite. Now, eventually we ended up getting way too many characters on Team Flash, a lot of which were terribly written and really, really horrible characters no one cared about. And instead of taking criticisms from the fans, they chose to force these characters even more and give them more time to shine. For example, the idea of Cecile becoming a superhero is just god awful and something that shouldn't have happened. Allegra was a boring character, horribly written, her abilities were awful. And I will even argue that the only likable character out of the new ones was Chester, and that was due to him actually being a proper Cisco replacement. That was someone that needed to fill up that role when Cisco was away. And of course he is a tech nerd and comedic relief as well. He did work, but again he is someone that did also lack character development as well. Worst of all, they completely butchered Caitlyn's character towards the end and added a brand new character called Keon, who was pretty much the main character alongside Cecile in the final season of the Flash's show, and that just made everyone lose it. But all of these characters really made Team Flash just so crammed up. Think about it, when you consider OG Team Flash, you just think of Wells, Cisco, Caitlyn, that's it. Now let me number you how many people are in Team Flash in the later seasons. Cecile, Iris, Allegra, Chester, Camilla, Caitlin, Frost, later on Keon, Iris, Barry, Joe. And of course I forgot, but you can count Wells as well. Now, half of these characters should have nothing to do with Team Flash. They should be separated into their own thing, but instead they're part of Team Flash, which makes this even worse. And as I said, it makes it so crammed up. Cecile should have just been worked on as a meta attorney. She should be doing her own thing as a meta attorney. Iris, Camilla, Allegra, and again Cecile should not be involved with Team Flash at all. They have nothing to do with Team Flash and should be focusing on their, journalism stuff. Everyone else, so Caitlin, Frost, fair enough. Joe, fair enough. Wells, fair enough. But the fact that Team Flash was just so crammed up, A, it took away a lot of spotlight from the main character, and B, led to a lot of very uninteresting and horrible storylines, and they just continued to force that, and that is what made this really bad. This made Barry look even more incapable in defeating villains all on his own. For example, the season 9 finale is a perfect example of this. You had the speedster villains coming back, okay, cool, but then you had non-speedsters being able to mop the floor with very powerful speedster villains that Barry struggled the whole season to face off against. It just did not make sense, and it made it so bad. It made them butcher these villains from the earlier seasons. And because of how crammed up Team Flash was, our main character was not the main character of the show. The show pretty much turned into Team Flash instead of The Flash. And this sucked, because the reason we watched the show was for the main character. And the fact that he was sidelined made it a lot harder and harder to get through. Now, another thing that made this show fall off was the filler episodes and interludes. And you can say forced romance as well, and I will get into that. Now, I am aware that filler episodes sometimes do need to happen, especially in the earlier seasons. You have 23 episodes a season, a full season long storyline. It's impossible to make it work. It's very hard to make it work, and that's why you need some filler episodes in between. That makes sense. And also, the more seasons this show got, or just any TV network show gets, the more the main character or the actor is entitled for a break and is able to be in the episode less. And this was something that happened with the show. You have 9 seasons, so Grant Gustin, who played Barry Allen, aka The Flash, was able to be in some episodes less than, of course, compared to previous seasons. And one of the worst parts of the show are often the filler episodes focused on other characters. For example, the other filler episodes were great. Enter Flashtime, I would argue, season 4 episode 15 was the best episode of the show because it had all the core elements in a filler episode that made it very good. But the worst parts of this show are the filler episodes focused on other characters. Season 4 did this with the very horrible Girls Night Out episode, for example. Now, like I said, in the earlier seasons, filler episodes did need to happen because there was no way you could stretch up a whole storyline with 23 episodes. The new showrunner from The Flash season 6 onwards found a perfect solution for this, and the way he executed it was the graphic novel strategy. But it made this even worse. So the solution was to do a graphic novel format, splitting up the season in half and getting 2 main storylines, keeping it much shorter, much more condensed, and much better paced because it did not drag out, so you needed less filler and it had 2 main villains. Like, why would you complain about that? Aside from the fact that it was very terribly written, you had a perfect format to combat fillers, but you end up doing 3 in a row interlude episodes in a row. So this means back to back. For example, if we had a half season of 20 episodes, you'd have the mid-season finale around like episode 8, and episode 9, 10, 11 would be an interlude episode. Of course, I'm just making an example over here. I can't remember when exactly the interludes were, but it was 3 in a row. That's what I do remember for sure. And with the icing on the cake, what made this even worse, as I said, was it focused on the side characters no one cared about, and the storylines were just horrible. This made fans even more frustrated because the newer addition of characters onto the show no one liked and often had fillers centered around them, and the fact that our main character was missing for 2 to 3 episodes, it just was not it. You know, it was not the Flash, and had the worst Team Flash characters have the spotlight, it made fans absolutely lose it. And the reason why is because they gave us no reason to care about the episode. You know, there's nothing that would want to make us watch it. There's no speedster element. Let me tell you, the show is called The Flash. There's no speedster element in that filler, and there's no main character. As I said, that no main character makes sense, but the fact that there's no speedster element does not really give you a reason to watch it. Now, as I said, I will give praise to The Flash where it's due, because I do love the show after all. One interlude that really did this well and proves my example is The Flash Season 8. And they done this really well. We had our main character missing, but they still kept the speedster element involved with Bart and Nora. They gave us a Bart and Nora episode, children of course Barry and Iris, and they maintained the speedster element of it. It made us care, they were characters we liked, and it was much more interesting than the other interludes we had. And surprise, surprise, despite this episode still not being the best, it was the best of the interlude fillers and undoubtedly is the most memorable one. This would have been combated easily if they've done the interlude episodes with far more interesting characters like your Wally, like your Jay Garrick, and once again with Bart and Nora, as I said, the core speedster element and characters we actually like. Now, as I said, another problem with the show eventually later on was the forced relationship drama between certain characters. For example, Chester and Allegra, they forced down us, and the problem with that is those two characters had absolutely no chemistry, and it just wasn't something that was necessary. They've only really done it to give these characters something to do, because as I said, later on in the show, Team Flash was just so crammed up, like they didn't really know what to do with some certain characters. And the relationship with Barry and Iris was another thing that did cause some issues. Now, of course, it is central to the series. This is Barry and Iris after all. But, you know, at some points they kind of made it like their own personal drama. And like it often had to do with a storyline that really didn't need to be there. For example, with the whole power of love thing and Iris giving, you know, the Speed Force enough energy for Barry being able to get his speed back in The Flash Season 7, that was not necessary. And of course the whole We Are the Flash thing is not something I was a fan of. But other than that, Barry and Iris of course is the best, you know, ship in this show compared to everyone else that we have had. I just don't like it when it has to do with the overall main plot. Now, as the seasons progressed, the tone of The Flash became very inconsistent. Earlier seasons balanced humor with drama and, you know, the darker tones and elements of mystery really well. And how they've, you know, done this with the villains, it was good. But later on, they completely got rid of this dark element. They've started to become more corny, more lighthearted, and more humorous. So much so that a lot of times, a lot of scenes just ended up being really cringe. A perfect example for this was the character of Red Death, for example, or even Godspeed. And with the addition to this, the writing in the later seasons was just horrible. It made the, you know, the character dialogues very cringe, and because of that, it just became so much harder to watch. And this did, of course, cause an issue. But as I said, all of this did have something to do with causing a downfall on this show. But yeah guys, this is pretty much it for this video. If you guys have enjoyed the video, please give a like and subscribe. Let me know in the comment section down below if you guys agree with what I said, or if you guys want to add something else that I might have forgotten to mention. I'm interested to see your thoughts in the comment section down below as well. And yeah, I will see you guys in my next video.